morning, everyone, and welcome to Auckland Unitarians. My name is Vivian Allen, and I'm your service leader today. We welcome you all of you into our doors, the joyful, the heartbroken, atheists, Christians, Muslims and Jews, straight and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, all who are searching, seeking, looking for more meaning, more service, more love. We know you come here for different reasons, to find community, to seek your spiritual and personal truths, to question, to nurture your heart and soul, to be nurtured, to explore new ideas, to find comfort, and perhaps to find the answers to some of your bigger questions. This coming Thursday is Suffrage Day in New Zealand. On 19th of September 1893, New Zealand women won the right to vote in elections. As a result, New Zealand became the first self-governing country in the world to extend this right to all women. Suffrage Day celebrates the aims of the movement for gender equality and is a reminder of the ongoing issue of equality for women. Today, we have a treat for you. Randolph Hollingsworth taught history and women's studies for over 3 decades at the University of Kentucky, and now, luckily for us, she lives in Auckland. She'll be giving us a short talk on a fascinating New Zealand woman, Annie Jane Schnackenberg, who was also my great-great-aunt, Nee Allen, Vivian Allen, Annie Allen. Annie Jane fought for women's rights here in New Zealand over a century ago. I'll tell you more about Randolph when I introduce her later. After the service, please join us for some refreshments. It's our sacrament of hospitality. My opening words are a poem from Maya Angelou. It's titled Equality. You declare you see me dimly through a glass which will not shine, though I stand before you boldly, trim in rank and marking time. You do own to hear me faintly as a whisper out of range, while my drums beat out the message and the rhythms never change. Equality and I will be free. Equality and I will be free. You announce my ways are wanton, that I fly from man to man. But if I'm just a shadow to you, could you ever understand? We have lived a painful history. We know the shameful past. But I keep marching forward, and you keep on coming last. Equality and I will be free. Equality and I will be free. We'll get there. Our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Those are words from Albert Schweitzer. Now, if you'd like to say the covenant of the Unitarians, which will be up on the screen. And we'll just say this together. Love is the doctrine of the Church, which the truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve mankind in fellowship, to the end of all each other. Now, we have the privilege of having Jamie here only once a month or so we're going to make the most of it, and Jamie's going to play us it's another tune called From Howell's Psalm Prelude, an English person. Jamie. I started attending a boarding school when I was 12, and my first day was quite scary. New rules, new clothes, and a dormitory where I'd be sleeping with 20 other girls. Every dorm had a prefect who helped you settle in, and my prefect was Marilyn Waring. Some of you might remember Marilyn as New Zealand's youngest politician at the time she was voted in. She was very kind to me, newbie, and she was 2 or 3 years older, and she helped me settle into my new home, which I'll always be thankful for. Something you may not know is she was also a first-class opera singer, top sportswoman, but she chose to make a difference by becoming a politician, academic, and author who fought for women's rights. Marilyn wrote a book, Counting for Nothing. In this book, she discussed that GDP, gross domestic product, which often countries are valued by or compared with, GDP here excluded the unpaid labour of one gender. Because GDP only looks at activities in the marketplace, it counts the work of a drug dealer, but not of a hospice worker or volunteer. It counts the production of nuclear weapons, but not women's unpaid work. Human activities of great value are made invisible, treated as valueless. One of Waring's famous examples is breastfeeding. Despite all we know about the benefits of breast milk, Waring pointed out that the more that manufactured formula milk replaces breastfeeding, the more it adds to GDP. Since GDP is equated with progress, a loss is defined as a gain. Marilyn is just one woman who picked up the mantle after Annie Jane Schnackenberg, who helped to progress women's rights in New Zealand. About a year ago, an email dropped into my inbox from my cousin Hamish, who I only catch up at family funerals occasionally. Attached to that email was a 93-page paper about my great-great-aunt, Annie Jane Schnackenberg, née Allen, who I knew little about except she'd fought for women's suffrage in New Zealand and was a fluent speaker of Maori. So I was very excited to find out that Randolph Hollingsworth had done a huge amount of research into Annie Jane's life and written a paper about her. I quickly got in touch with Randolph to find out more and was delighted to meet her as she now lives in Auckland. Randolph is an independent scholar who enjoys researching women's history, which is how she came to write about Annie Jane. Often in New Zealand, we only hear about the main characters in history, such as Kate Shepherd, but there were many more women and some men who helped fight for women's rights. But I'm going to let Randolph tell you more about this fascinating woman, Annie Jane. Randolph.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. I came to New Zealand in 2018 and started in on my research on Mary Clement Leavitt, an American who came to New Zealand in 1885. And within 7 years, New Zealanders had crafted a campaign such that it was a global first, that women gained the right to vote in national elections. So I just wanted to let you see who it was that I started working on. And also there's a map here that shows how small the white population of New Zealand was during this time period. It doesn't show the Maori. Do you mind passing this around so people can see? And then I had a great admiration for genealogists and feel that the work has to be done to find out who these people are. And indeed, the descendants of Annie Jane Schnackenberg have come most generously to help me as I examine this woman and her life. So I have for you the genealogy of Annie Jane's family and her own children, that you might recognize some of these people. So Annie Jane Schnackenberg has a political life. And not many people think about that when they think of women's history, but in the 19th century. But she had a political life that began in England as a young adult in the Wesleyan church. She was a church worker and honed her life by that background as a missionary teacher in the Waikato region of New Zealand. And she was in that region from 1861 to 1880. And the organizational structure that was adopted from the U.S. Women's Christian Temperance Union, 1885 is when Levitt came, to create a political change in New Zealand that nearly all the direct expressions, all the written words of her journals and her papers that might have documented her political ideology were destroyed by her eldest daughter, Katrina Astley, in the 1930s. And this is the national president of an internationally first activity. All her records are destroyed. And Katrina insisted that Annie Jane Schnackenberg's journals and her papers were, quote unquote, too personal. So I have to reach into the political ideologies of the time to find Annie Jane, as well as examine her beliefs that were based on English, nonconformist liberal reform, but also influenced by the Maori and by the Women's Christian Temperance Union, or WCTU. So I'm going to actually refer a lot to the nonconformists and dissenting political theorists, who, by the way, were Unitarian in England. So let's look at her early life. As a young adult, she showed economic independence, plus volunteerism. This is a picture of where she grew up in Leamington Spa, Royal Spa. And she was leading music in church. She did Sunday school for children, prayer circles in neighbors' homes, the charity work for the poor, fundraising, organizing food drives, and clothing. So at 26, she sailed to New Zealand. So she's an adult and a wage-earning adult with a high level of skill. So I have passed around her family, and Viv, if you want to add who
John.
You come out of John, okay. So I have all of his children on the paper that's going around. So Mary Hooper, her sister, went on together with her as a missionary teacher, and then eventually marries the military doctor. Thomas, who never marries, wrote a travel book and traveled around the world and attended international peace conferences and temperance conferences on the behalf of New Zealand. But he died in England, and if any genealogists want to take this on, I don't know where he's buried. Nobody knows. Eliza went on to be Pegler, was a teacher as well, and she taught in the Waikato for a while, and in Raglan for many years, and ends up living in Mount Albert. Edward, this is the son with whom she came to live in the last days of her life, married Emma Mary Southgate, and he was 15 on the voyage, joined the military at 16, and was drafted to Otahuhu to guard convicts and Maori prisoners. captured at the Battle of Rangiriri. So he goes to Cambridge to farm and is a co-founder and director of the Cambridge Dairy Factory. John married Lissy Kemp, or Elizabeth Ann, and is the mother of, who was the mother of Elsie, who married an Edward Schnackenberg. And it is these guys that have people who went to live down in Kafia. And I didn't get to meet the descendant, but got to see all the stuff that he gave there in Kafia, and including, if you want to turn the page here, including her hymnal. And I got to hold it in my hand. It's really fun. If you ever get a chance to hold a person of international fame, anything of theirs, it's down in Kafia. So Ruth Fry wrote a history of Wesleyan women missionaries in which she described Annie Allen. And she quickly learned Maori, was regularly commended in school inspection reports, and became popular among local people. And during her life as a single woman, and then married with children, she would have learned much of Maori women's customs and political leadership in the Waikato during the New Zealand Wars and land confiscations. So her decades spent in teaching undergirded her political work for curricular reform in the 1880s and 90s. So the war comes in, and it's a very wealthy country. There you can see a little map of where she and her husband lived. She basically, by 1864, had pulled back into Raglan, despite the Reverend's repeated advice to Governor Grey to keep Maori independent. Grey had signed into law New Zealand's Settlement Act, the land confiscation law. So she and her husband both were solidly against the idea that Maori had no rights to the land. So the idea of becoming her own person really happens, I think, after she has all her babies. She has 5 babies, and the Reverend died in 1880. And they all go back to Mount Albert, where the Allens lived, Edward and Elizabeth, her dad and mother. And she was teaching Sunday school and managing the committee for the Mount Albert Total Abstinence Society, and doing political petitions and canvassing and church fundraising. By 1884, 5 of the 7 districts in Auckland have no liquor licenses. So, if you want to turn, let's take her on into her public life. By the 1880s, the U.S. Women's Christian Temperance Union had, under the leadership of Frances Willard, created a massive political mobilization of women, and it was the largest women's organization in the U.S. This political mobilization assured a process in which formerly passive or excluded individuals could participate for an extended period of time in a collective action to create change. Willard was conscious of this and wrote manuals for reform leaders to design arguments of political ideology that would persuade audiences to follow that leader, to join the organization, to activate and maintain the excluded groups, volunteerism, and attention to prescribed tasks. So the how-to book went out all over the world. And this is actually the 150th anniversary of the WCTU. I just participated in a book collection. I submitted the one on New Zealand for the WCTU. And it's astounding how powerful they were across the globe. So Levitt arrived in Auckland in 1885, in January, and the women, the ladies' Christian associations, were already working on a barmaid petition. Now you think, why barmaids? What's the problem with barmaids? Well, they were trying to get women out of the pubs. And that's because we tend to think of women as adults. Well, working age is 14. at the time, and the age of consent, that is, the age by which girls can say they can consent to sex, was 12. So bars, pubs were advertising for beautiful young girls, and it was an easy and readily acceptable way to earn money in a place and time where earning money is difficult. So the WCTU was pushing for the protection of young girls. The organizing tour in 1885 by Mary Clement Leavitt was crucial in developing the political ideology of Annie Jane Allen Schnackenberg. The first superintendent for what is called the scientific temperance instruction is Schnackenberg, when the first branch is organized in February 1885. And in 86, when Ann Ward organized the first national WCTU conference, Schnackenberg is founded the overall national superintendent of the temperance instruction at the national level, and began interacting with Mary Henshett Hunt in the U.S., a former school teacher and the international STI superintendent. So this is happening globally, and Annie Jane is part of this global conversation by the mid-1880s. In 1886, the WCTU resolved to petition the government to make scientific temperance instruction compulsory, and that curriculum reform as a political goal. So when I say scientific temperance instruction, I'm not just talking about don't drink. It was a book that showed the components of a body. And it talked about how alcohol will poison your body, not just as you drink it or soon after you drink it, but also poison your fetus. So it was Women's Christian Temperance Union that was emphasizing alcohol as a way of destroying your own family in multiple ways, not just physiologically, but also morally. And there were lots of temperance advocates around, and they were talking about how they had a tough life and being drunk was bad, but it was the STI of the Women's Christian Temperance Union that put it in a book and used scientific knowledge to explain what alcohol can do to you and your baby. So, and this was handed out in schools. It was the only book that showed how your body worked. So in 1887, Ann Ward, the first president, had come to Auckland to start a free kindergarten. It's the Auckland Jubilee Kindergarten on High Street. And Annie Jane Schnackenberg became a part of that effort and included scientific temperance instruction, even for babies, because there's all kinds of things you can do to show, what's bad for you as you eat. So, and what's good for you. So the consensus work that the WCTU was emphasizing in the 1880s leads to 3 petitions by the WCTU in 1888. The repeal of the Contagious Diseases Act, which had originated here in 1869, and the idea was that the police could pick up any woman they thought was a prostitute and forcibly examine her genitally to see if she had a venereal disease. So the WCTU was against that because it takes 2 to transmit a sexual disease. And Auckland had a lock hospital where the women would be placed. Keep in mind, the Auckland Lock Hospital has kept its records, and Barbara Brooks found that the youngest person to be placed in the Auckland Lock Hospital was 10. They also pushed for a law to prohibit selling alcohol to children under 16 and to substitute the word person for male in the electoral bill. So on January 1887, Schnackenberg was elected to the presidency of the Auckland WCTU branch, which was the first one that Levitt had put together, and served in this role until 1897, and she was appointed at the WCTU convention in March 1887 to focus on scientific temperance instruction. By March of 1892, she was elected national president of the WCTU and served through 1901. Like many of her British predecessors who published on women's rights, including such essayists as Harriet Taylor Mill and Carolyn Sheridan Norton in England in the 1850s, Schnackenberg spoke regularly about individual liberty and bodily autonomy. As an extension of this idea, secondly, she also emphasized the need for women's access to a rigorous education in science, civics, and political philosophy. Thirdly, women's right to vote connected naturally to this vision of an educated and committed citizen working through a collective spirit of activists and an organized, nonpartisan bloc. A fourth point to scrutinize was regularly emphasized in both her speeches and her activities, a dedicated effort at inclusiveness, that women across racially segregated barriers and nations were her sisters, and all deserved a voice in decision-making for a better accord. So just as Harriet Taylor Mill, the wife of John Stuart Mill, wrote several generations earlier in England, she was the co-author of the book on liberty. Schnackenberg consistently advocated for full legal, social, and economic equality of the sexes. While a young working woman, Schnackenberg might have read Taylor Mill's essay that was published in 1850, The Enfranchisement of Women, which in a statement emphasized women's right to the vote, stated that men and women should not have to live in separate spheres. For example, in the year after women in New Zealand voted in national election, Schnackenberg stated in her 1894 presidential address that year, "The women of today are not content to be dolls and playthings, but had risen to the occasion and were determined to do all in their power to bring about reform." And so the WCTU's work in temperance connected directly with their moral force derived from a Protestant Christian ethic, as well as an abiding belief that both the drinking and selling of alcohol destroyed this moral core that was required of a healthy democracy. At the same time, she led the campaign for a petition in Parliament to raise the age of consent for women from 12 to 18 to allow for rights over their own body and property. She also urged WCTU members to use a different language about the legal status of a child's age of consent. Instead, she urged members to use the phrase age of protection because, she stated, she could not imagine it ever possible for a girl or a woman to consent to her own ruin. So at the organizational meeting of what became the National Council of Women in New Zealand in 1896, she focused on putting forward resolutions calling for the support for the right of co-guardianship of one's own children, for divorce reform, and a carefully worded resolution that supported the rights of voters in a democracy. Similarly, as Carolyn Norton had written in her English pamphlet in 1854 advocating for married women's rights, power, in its purer form, is protection. Power, in its corrupt form, is oppression. Now, Schnackenberg emphasized that a woman's role as a wife or mother should not limit her pursuit of self-development and any careers for which she might be prepared. Now, this included the right for women to vote. As early as March 1890, at an annual meeting of the male-led New Zealand Alliance for the Abolition of the Liquor Traffic, Annie Jane reminded the male leaders that they still had not openly shown their support for women's franchise as recognition of women's equal rights. And she stood to speak, representing the WCTU NZ, and asked whether the alliance included that franchise for women in its mission. Upon hearing that this topic was not a formal part of the New Zealand Alliance's work, she, quote, thanked the chairman and then presented the argument used by suffragists around the world when she said, "Women claimed to have more intelligence than a child and were better fitted to exercise their rights than criminals and lunatics. She asserted that women claimed their rights of equality and they wanted the direct vote as to who should go into Parliament. Her presidential address in 1898 at the WCTU convention in Napier, which was the largest convention they had held, emphasized the role of education, and we ourselves and women generally need instructing in our duties and responsibilities as citizens, that we may have laws which harmonize with the law of God, in harmony with the Golden Rule, equal purity, equal personal liberty, equal opportunity for men and women. So you have to keep in mind that there were no high schools for girls. And Edger does it in Nelson, but there's really very few opportunities for girls to go beyond just basic reading and writing. Some arithmetic, not much. So the idea that the WCTUNZ's motto, God, Home, and Humanity, called for political activities that protected not just women, who were vulnerable to violence caused by drunken men, but also the homes where a woman's addiction could lead to deformities. The idea, as Taylor Mill put it, the rigorous and fulsome education of women would benefit not only themselves and their families, but society as a whole. Men who restrict the education of girls and women are depriving themselves when they keep women oppressed and submissive. The most eminent men cease to improve if they associate only with disciples. The mental companionship which improving is communion between active minds, which may be something she was describing about herself and John Stuart Mill. Not mere contact between an active mind and a passive. This inestimable advantage is even now enjoyed when a strong-minded man and a strong-minded woman are, by a rare chance, united, and would be, had far oftener, if education took the same pains to form strong-minded women, which it takes to prevent them from being formed. So let's look at the next one. Suffragists in the 19th century emphasized that at the core of the right to vote was self-government. They focused on ways to express how a woman's actions and opinions derived from self-determination and a moral code by which she sought to do good for her family and community. As the U.S. suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton argued before Congress in 1884, now the right of suffrage in a republic means self-government, and self-government means education, development, self-reliance, independence, courage in the hour of danger. The ballot is a scepter of power in the hand of every citizen. The disenfranchisement of one half of the people places a dangerous power in the hands of the other. Willard used the same imagery in her speech before the U.S. Senate Committee on Women's Suffrage in 1888. And that's what I have up here. The ballot is a compendium of all there is in civilization. The idea that if you have the vote, you are clad in a garment of power. And that's one of her famous quotes. And look at Annie Jane's presidential address in 1896. Remember that this is a sacred duty, a great responsibility. You don't just choose to vote just because you happen to be out. You have to vote. You must vote. So my last bit I want to talk about here is about inclusiveness. And it's during Annie Jane's presidency that the work to ally with and to include Maori leaders, not just proselytize or minister them as missionaries, officially began. It was Schnackenberg in 1896 who printed her greetings in Te Reo in the White Ribbon, which was their newsletter, as well as a letter to her Maori sisters. It's her work with the Maori WCTU leaders that is key to understanding her political ideologies. The gist of her letter was that this was an introductory statement of greetings with more to come in the future, and she expressed thankfulness upon hearing of their temperance work. So in 1896, from the Dunedin WCTU convention, Annie Jane traveled to Christchurch for the inaugural Council of Women. She's elected one of the 4 VPs. Annie Jane represented the WCTU NZ as a founding member of the NCW in 1896, and on the first days of the NCW Council included support for the right of co-guardianship of one's own children, divorce reform, and a carefully worded resolution supporting the rights of voters. It also was a time when she came up against Marianne Allen Tasker of the Women's Democratic Union in Wellington. Tasker was hoping that the council would support an exclusion act of Chinese immigrants. And Annie Jane was pushing back. She insisted that any blame that Tasker might have placed on the Chinese could be placed instead on the British. That using information from WCTU sources and something called the polyglot petition, Annie Jane insisted that some of the bad habits of the Chinese were forced upon them by us, opium consuming, for instance, at the point of the sword. So Amy Daldy and Lady Anna Stout supported her in this, and they succeeded in the effort to get Tasker to withdraw her motion. So Schnackenberg enacted what today we would consider best practices for a progressive ally of oppressed groups, working to remove barriers that halt the actions or impede the aspirations of those who are systemically restrained due to their class, gender, or ethnic heritage. So as her body began to evidence the wear and tear of the past decade's public service and travel, she spent time on writing words of encouragement to her WCTU NZ sisters in short correspondences published in the White Ribbon. So that's really all I have in terms of a record, that and newspaper articles. In 1905, at the age of 70, Annie Jane Allen Schnackenberg died. She'd been ill for at least 2 years and probably housebound for some time before then. And she died at her eldest daughter, Rena and John Astley's house in Morningside on Western Springs Road in Mount Albert. I'd love it if anybody knows where the Astley house is. All her work had centered on the dignity of an educated community member in which one's human rights were recognized and celebrated. And the perspective that she brought to her political actions had been fueled by her lived experiences in and among the Maori, who loved and respected her. Her strong piety and her devotion to children colored her sense of what the WCTU meant by mother love, is what they called it. And that's what I love your poster here, because it fits very well with what Frances Willard was emphasizing about love. So first was her devotion to God and family, and the rest was her service to humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. I reckon I got her nose. Thank you so much for that. That was fascinating. There was still a lot there. Yeah. There was a lot there that I didn't know, even though I've read. Thank you so much for kind of filling it out. Do we have Extinguishing the Chalice? Do we have the words? We extinguish the flame.
I just thought we'd give a bit of a representation of womanhood. Phenomenal woman. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. Should we do it? I'll do one, you do one? Yeah. So I'll do the first one. Bossy. Pretty women wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size, but when I start to tell them, they think I'm telling lies. I say, it's in the reach of my arms, the span of my hips, the stride of my step, and the curl of my lips. I am a woman, phenomenal woman. That's me.
I walk into a room just as cool as you please, and to a man the fellows stand or fall down on their knees. But when they swarm around me, a hive of honeybees.
I say it's in the fire in my eyes and the flesh of my teeth, the swing of my waist and the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. That's me.
I knew she'd be good. Men themselves have wondered what they see in me. They try so much, but they can't touch my inner mystery. When I try to show them, they say they still can't see it. I say it's in the arch of my back, the sun of my smile, the ride of my breasts, the grace in my style. I am a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. That's me.
Now you understand just why my head's not bowed. I don't shout or jump about, or have to talk real loud. When you see me passing, it ought to make you proud. I say it's in the click of my heels, the bend of my hair, the palm of my hand, the need of my care. Because I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman. Phenomenal woman, that's me.
Why don't you read that bit again, Rachel, because you were damn fine at it.
It's in the fire in my eyes and the flesh of my teeth, the swing in my waist and the joy in my feet. I'm a woman, phenomenally, phenomenal woman.